My name is Rose Skelton and I'm a former crew member at Tobermory lifeboat station. My grandfather was crew at Dover lifeboat before I knew him. I never really knew that much about him because he didn't talk that much about himself. But after he died, his wishes were to be scattered from the Tobermory lifeboat. And it was then that I started to understand that he'd had this other life as a lifeboat crew member. And my mother dug out some old photos of him, some black and white photos of him on the boat. And it was after his death that I started to understand that the lifeboat had been such an important part of his life. Growing up, I spent a lot of time with him on the Isle of Mull, with his boats, around the farm, and I decided I wanted to join and to pick up where he had left off. So the first time I went and sat with the crew, I just felt so excited. I felt so excited to meet all these people that I otherwise wouldn't probably have met. There were 4 other women on the crew at that time, either on the crew or as part of the operations. And so that felt, it was probably about a quarter at that time. That felt really welcoming to me. It was a dream come true. It was really, and it was such a powerful dream for me, I think, because I didn't think that I would be a valuable member of the crew. And so when I went in and was kind of greeted as if I already had something to offer, it felt very unreal and very kind of dizzying. And I was just very, very excited. Tobermory obviously it's a coastal town. It's a fishing town. There's a lot of fish farms. There's a lot of scallop boats going out. Most people have some kind of history with boats. And so it was hard to fit into that. But I think that what isn't talked about was the other skills involved in running a boat. I mean, you're running a life-saving, team and piece of machinery. And yes, I don't know anything about the mechanics of how a boat runs, and I probably never will. And, I'll probably always struggle with certain knots, but I actually, I come from a background of investigative journalism. I spent a long time interviewing people in really dangerous places and covering coups and violent elections. I'm very calm under pressure. And I think that what I had to learn, which was very hard for me, was to know when to have confidence in myself and to know when not to have confidence in myself and to ask for help. And that's a delicate thing to manage 25 personalities who all have different skills. You may have a whole crew of people who've had boats since they were kids, but we had a diver who unfortunately we performed CPR on him for quite a while before the helicopter came. But his diving mate was on the boat watching it all happen and was obviously absolutely devastated. And, we all naturally took to our roles in that moment. And so I sat with him and talked to him and just distracted him from what was happening on the deck. And, that's a skill that perhaps someone who, there was a couple of guys who have always been on boats, who were skippers on other boats, who were managing the dive boats. We just naturally took to our strongest roles. And so I think that that's something that perhaps is not obvious from the outside, how many different skills are involved in keeping a crew together, keeping a crew happy. I mean, it could be, I remember when I told my mum I was joining the crew, and she said, well, that's great. You're so good at baking cakes. And, and I thought, well, I have other skills too, but actually, baking cakes is a really big part of being in the RNLI. We have get-togethers, we have parties, we have barbecues, we have, fundraising events. There's so many things that you can bring to being a crew member, obviously beyond baking cakes. Just human skills. I mean, there's so many really important human skills involved in being in a crew. My wife and I got married in Philadelphia, in the US, because I was applying for my green card. So we had a quick wedding with just her parents there at City Hall. And then we had always planned to get married in Mull, but because of paperwork, it just hadn't worked out that way. So later on that year, we decided we'd have a winter solstice wedding blessing in Tobermory on the Fisherman's Pier, right in front of the lifeboat station. We had 6 crew members holding ceremonial oars, and we had the Mull and Iona pipe band who piped us down the street. And my wife's family were all there from America. So David McAfee, our coxswain, gave us a blessing and did a beautiful ceremony. And my wife and I read a poem together, and we had a Tobermory whiskey toast. And then we all went to the village hall down the main street to have some food and some snacks. It was the middle of the day. And then, a couple of hours later, my wife and I and a friend were washing up all the glasses in the kitchen in the hall. We were going to have a ceilidh that night. My pager went off. It was a split second where I thought, oh, this is a prank, because it's insane that my pager would go off now. And then, a split second later, I realized, obviously that would never be a prank. And so I just put down I was drying glasses with a tea towel, and I looked at my friends and my wife and said, don't worry, I'll be back. And I just, I ran down the main street. Luckily, I was already halfway along and got to the lifeboat station at the end of the street. And there really weren't any crew. There was hardly any crew. There was a couple of members there. So I started to undress. And I could not get this bow tie off, and was down to my underwear and my shirt and this tie. And when Sam, the operations manager, came in and said, what are you doing here? And it was probably 2 minutes since my pager. I just hadn't had time to think. After that split second of thinking, oh, don't worry, this is a joke. I just didn't think. It didn't occur to me that, my wife's family had traveled 4,000 miles from DC to be here, and that we were going to have a ceilidh that night, and all our friends were there, and people I hadn't seen in 25 years had shown up, come all the way from, a long way to this party. It hadn't occurred to me that I might spend the whole night out on a boat. Anyway, eventually, enough crew did show up, and it was a person in the water who had been out in a dinghy and had fallen out of the boat. And sea temperatures at that time of year, as are desperately low, and it really was a matter of life and death. So there's no part of me that wouldn't have gone on that boat. I also know that my wife would have understood. She knew when we got together that this was the life that she was getting into. To have left her on our wedding day would have been quite something. But that's part of being. I feel like she's also part of the crew in that sense, that she supports me in what I want to do and what I need to do. And at that moment, there was someone in the water, and I would have gone. So that was our wedding day. I think the RNLI, for me, as a member of a very small coastal community, or island community, is, yes, it's a lifeline. Of course, it takes people to hospital when they're in labor in the middle of the night, people who are sick, who need to get to the mainland, to the hospital. It's a physical lifeline in that sense. But I think for me, to be accepted with all my lack of seagoing experience and, rope tying skills, to be accepted for who I was, to be given jobs to do, and to be given roles to perform, and to be, whatever that role was, whether, it was an emotional role or a physical role, or, all the different roles that we each perform as RNLI crew members, really sort of knotted me into this community that I wanted to belong to, and I really, needed to. And so it kind of became a lifeline to me as well, in the sense that it just tied me to this community that now, my wife and I are working really hard to get back to. We have a 1-year-old son now, and we want to bring him up, for some years in Mull. And that feels really important to me. And to think of him living on the main street, watching, the crew members drive down the street and run down the street, and hearing the boat go out. And he's only one, so I won't say that he's going to join the RNLI, but he might. And that'll be a third generation in my family. And it feels particularly important to me that, as much as the RNLI is a very open, progressive, and diverse organization, it has been particularly important to me to feel that I have been able to play a role in it, and not face, I wasn't sidelined, or less was never expected of me because of my gender. And so that's felt really important to me, to both be a part of that and also have the opportunity to show to the public that there are women involved, and there are gay women involved, and your daughter might want to join, and that would she would really play a valuable part. It's been everything to me. I mean, I'm not in the crew now, and that's really, really difficult for me. I miss it desperately. It makes me tearful to think about it. I think my grandfather would probably, in his very quiet and not very expressive way, feel very proud, and I'm sure he would just feel really happy.
Hello, it's Phil Coulter here. You've been listening to part of the RNLI's 200 Voices collection. To hear more remarkable stories, head to rnli.org 200 Voices, or subscribe to the RNLI wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you.
"200 Voices" is produced for the RNLI by Adventurous Audio Limited.